Hey family, it's Carlos Watson. Hey, you know I always want to bring you the most interesting people, big, bold thinkers, and who better than Sal Khan, who started the famous online education group, the Khan Academy. Now, I figured with everything crazy going on, all the remote learning, he'd be a really interesting person to speak to. But you know why else I wanted to talk to him? As the son and grandson of teachers, I think there's so much about education these days, including what's happening in terms of racial divides. And I thought Sal might be the right guy to tell me whether or not there's hope ahead. Hope you enjoy this show. If you do, make sure you subscribe and listen now.
Fortune published a story, Meet Bill Gates' Favorite Teacher. We went from about 250,000 users to about 1 million overnight. One of my friends said, why don't you record lessons on YouTube for your family? And my initial reaction was, horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano. We need to evolve our school system, move to a competency-based system, allow for personalization and mastery. Growing up in Louisiana, when people didn't know what to make of me, I think most people thought that I was Latino.
So I'm so glad to have you on the show, and I've been wanting to have you on the show for a long time. And we always, in our mind, we're trying to welcome the boldest thinkers in the world. And so love having you as part of that. I feel like you probably have been interviewed 12 bazillion times about how Khan Academy started. But if you don't mind, for the 1 millionth and one time, tell that story again, because I do think that a creation story has a magic to it. And I imagine that even in your mind, maybe it's evolved a little bit. How did you go from being a MIT trained, Harvard MBA, hedge fund successful analyst to saying, I'm going to do something in free education?
Yeah, it all started back in 2004. As you mentioned, I was a year out of business school. My original background was in tech, but I was now an analyst at a hedge fund in Boston, a small one. It was me and my boss, who was portfolio manager, and I just gotten married, and my family from New Orleans was visiting me up in Boston, and it came out of conversation that my 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble with math, unit conversion in particular. When I found that out, I said, hey Nadia, when you go back to New Orleans, how about I tutor you? And she agreed. I think she was skeptical, but she was worth giving a shot. And I started working with her every day after the markets closed, essentially. And so I was hooked. I kept working with her. I started working with her younger brothers. Word spreads in my family that free tutoring is going on. And before I know it, 10, 15 cousins, family, friends, every day after work. And, I saw patterns. The reason why they were having difficulty was they had gaps in their knowledge. In the traditional system, there's not easy ways to fill in those gaps. So I started writing software for them that can give them practice to fill in those gaps for me as their tutor to keep track. That was the first Khan Academy. It had nothing to do with videos. One of my friends said, why don't you record lessons on YouTube for your family? And my initial reaction was, horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano, not for serious mathematics.
Right.
But I got over the idea that it wasn't my idea, and I gave that a shot. And, you fast forward to 2009, and there was about 50 or 100,000 folks who were using all of these resources on a regular basis. Obviously, they're not my cousins anymore. And I set it up as a not-for-profit, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And quit my day job, thinking surely the universe will conspire to make this a real thing. That first year was tough. The universe did not conspire to support us as quickly as I would have hoped. But eventually we got there.
I started to hear your name everywhere. 2011, 12, I feel like there was a big burst of publicity.
The story of a young man teaching math to the world.
Educator and entrepreneur Sal Khan.
Online education pioneer Sal Khan is expanding the reach of his learning empire.
You really became kind of part of the firmament, and probably one of the first that I heard about in a different kind of way, talking about online education in that K-12 space. What happened around 2011, 12 that all of a sudden I started hearing your name everywhere? Or was there a slow build and I actually missed an earlier pop?
There was a slow build with a few inflection points. Fall of 2009 was when I quit my day job to work on this full time. My wife and I, we had our first child. We're living here in Mountain View and living off of savings. And I was getting a lot of rejections from a lot of foundations. And then it turned out that Bill Gates was at some random conference, and Walter Isaacson asked him, what are you excited about? Broad question. And Bill Gates says, well, there's this thing called Khan Academy. I'm using it with my kids. And he was apparently like a super user of Khan Academy.
There's a new website that I've just been using with my kids recently called Khan Academy, Khan. Just one guy doing some unbelievable 15-minute tutorials.
Right at that moment that was happening, I think it was August 2010 or July 2010, Fortune had reached out to me saying, hey, we've been hearing about this thing. I've been hearing word of mouth that a lot of kids have been using it. And while that reporter, his name was Robert Kaplan, was doing the story, he's like, did you hear about this thing Bill Gates just said? I was like, I heard it at the same time as you. I had no clue. And then he says, well, I'm going to call up Bill Gates and see what he did. I was like, yeah, you do that. Call up Bill Gates. I don't know how to call up Bill Gates. And so he called up Bill Gates, and then he called me back. He's like, I think you're going to like the story, Sal. And like a week later, Fortune published a story, Meet Bill Gates' Favorite Teacher. And that was kind of a pop that we saw. We went from about 250,000 users to about 1 million overnight because that went viral. And then this is April of 2011. That's when I gave the TED Talk, kind of putting Khan Academy into a broader vision of like, we have to personalize education. We have to let kids fill in their gaps. And now there's tools where we can do it for every student on the planet.
You know, a lot of the effort in humanizing the classroom is focused on student to teacher ratios. In our mind, the relevant metric is student to valuable human time with the teacher ratio.
I think it was summer of 2011, 60 Minutes did a big piece on us. So that was another inflection point. I think by that point we'd gotten to 3 million users, and now we're about 20 or 30 million every month. But it's just continued, and there's been these step functions.
What if the Biden administration came to you and said, Sal, we love what you're doing, would love for you to be Secretary of Education, would love for you to help us reimagine how we approach education? What would you say?
On the job itself, I'd probably say, there's plenty of people who I would love to be kind of, tied at the hip with, who could probably do the Secretary of Education job. Because really the work of Khan Academy, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, it really could be the work of government. The argument of why it needs to exist in the not-for-profit sector is you can innovate a little bit faster, a little bit nimbly through philanthropists, but government is where the potential to really scale and really resource it is. So how do we work together so that we can, at a nationwide, or actually even the State Department at a global level, make it so that every kid on the planet has access to world-class materials. They can learn in a personalized way. I'm working on this project, schoolhouse.world, so that everyone can have access to free small group tutoring, and that there's ways for people to prove what they know. And if you take an assessment on Khan Academy and you're validated, you submit it, you get credit. You get college algebra credit, even if you're in 9th grade, and it's recognized throughout the country. And that's where government could help, because there's a lot of, I would say, backward-looking systems for how credit and things like that are done that I think we could make a lot of difference on.
Talk to me about what you see today out there in education. Do you think most American kids get a quality education and just could use some supplemental help? Do you think, by and large, we still are kind of which Jeb Bush said to me recently on the show, that we're kind of mediocre when it comes to the quality of education here in the U.S.? Where do you think we are right now?
Yeah, it depends, where you look and what you're comparing it to. A lot of times people will point to Singapore or Finland because they have the best test scores. And, if you go visit a school in Singapore or Finland, you still see a lot of bored kids. You still see a lot of kids that are kind of not so engaged. And there's pockets to the US. I mean, Finland and Singapore, if you compare Massachusetts to Finland, Massachusetts looks great. But still, you visit Massachusetts, you'll still see kids who are getting disengaged, who are bored. Nationwide, 70% of all kids who go to community college have to take remedial math. Remedial math is not 11th or 12th grade math. It is 6th or 7th grade math. So they're shepherded along. We all remember being bored in a class, staring at the clock. And teachers know this too. Teachers wish they could cater to the individual needs of the students, but they can't because there's 30 kids in a classroom. So they keep going. I get a 70% on a test, you get an 80%. Even though we identified those gaps, the lesson plan keeps going and it's going to build on those gaps. So I would give us a C, and there's pockets of B pluses, but there's a lot of pockets of D's, D minuses. Even the fancy private schools in the US, or some of the richest suburbs, that everything looks nice. They have the fancy lab, but the kids are still moving lockstep. Even there, you'll find some kids who are disengaged. How do we bring those, all experiences closer to an A, where the education caters to the needs of the student versus the student just kind of being pushed down a factory line, hoping that some of them get through at a reasonable level?
So how much do you think about policy? Are you very involved in policy and politics?
We have a view on the digital divide. For 1%, my back of the envelope calculations, for 1% of one of these $1 trillion stimulus packages, you could pretty much solve the digital divide in America. I'm not, drafting the laws myself, but we're signatories. I speak up about it. We work with Common Sense Media. There's a Connect All Students campaign. I talk to state commissioners of education, governors, Secretary of Education about ways that we need to evolve our school system, move to a competency-based system, allow for personalization and mastery, digital divide, so more people can access these types of tools. What could the classroom of the future look like? So it's more human-to-human interaction versus passively listening to a lecture. So we have a very strong point of view, and we're, as we grow, we're realizing that we do have to build more and more of this muscle of how do we interface with government and policymakers.
Sal, talk to me a little bit about race. You, again, I feel like have had a really interesting journey coming from an Indian family placed in the South. But tell me 2 or 3 of the interesting things that you've personally learned about race over the last 15 years, given the work that you're doing, whether good things or bad things that you may have learned on the matter of race.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because as you mentioned, growing up in Louisiana, people didn't know what to make of me. Depending on, I think most people thought that I was Latino, frankly, until the first Gulf War happened. And then, then they realized there were people called Muslims. And for the most part, it wasn't a popular category to be in the 90s, even in the 2000s. The U.S. has a lot of issues around race. And, there's some very clear historical issues that the U.S. is still coping with. But I tend to be very optimistic about the U.S. because when you grow up, I was born in New Orleans, but when you see family in the Indian subcontinent, my family's Bengali, some of them are from Bangladesh, India. It was all part of the Indian subcontinent. In most of the rest of the world, people are far more race conscious than I think most Americans realize. In India, people will look at your last name and they will try to think about if you're Hindu, what caste you are, or what Muslim, what region you're, and there's a lot of tribalism going on there, even in, places that seem more enlightened in Europe and other places. One layer down, you feel a lot more racism. I remember when I first went to England, I felt it more there than I felt it in Deep South. And, David Duke was my state representative. So I lived in literally...
A Klansman, a former Klansman.
He was my state representative and he represented me in Congress. That's where I grew up. But even there, I thought that the U.S. Has always done a better job, at least struggling with it and discussing it. So my view on race is we have a lot to sort through, but I think the U.S., as tough as it feels right now, and it feels like we take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I still think the U.S. is one of the most open-minded places that's really, truly struggling with the issue to get to a better place.
If I were to say to you and to lots of others, America has had lots of ups and downs, but overall has had a great first 250 years. But now we're ready for America 2.0. Now we're ready to reset America. What would be some of your recommendations? What would be on your agenda list? What would be in your Bill of Rights if you were helping us reset America?
I think if we were living in the time we are now, I think our forms of representation should be different. You still want a representative democracy, but 200 years ago, the way to do that is you represent by geography. I think there's interesting models. I read a lot of science fiction books. I think there's Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I read it like 10 years ago. But in that, there's a civilization on the moon, and their form of democracy is more of, I have a vote. If I feel that you are very much someone that is aligned with me, but you kind of are more well-informed than I am or are on top of it, you can represent me. And then if you meet someone who's really has their act together, they can roll up their votes by you and other people. And eventually, the top 400 show up in Congress. Actually, you don't even have to do that because you can essentially have all these represented votes show up where you don't even need to have a finite Congress anymore, right? You can imagine a world with technology as we have it. You meet on video conference and everyone can vote, but you can delegate your vote to someone else. But if all of a sudden I see that, Carlos isn't voting the way that I would like on that issue, I could take my vote from him and give it to someone else. And you could have real-time analysis of that. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
Sal, I know our time is running out, so I wanted to pick your brain on what I love to call rapid fire. And I wanted to hit you, if you don't mind, with a few quick things and then see where we end up.
Sounds good.
Your favorite athlete of all time?
Favorite athlete of all time? I'll go with Drew Brees. I'm a Saints fan.
Oh, love it. Okay, I didn't even know if you were a sports fan or not. Most interesting place that you've ever visited or want to visit?
Oh, I haven't visited Iceland yet, but I think I would like it.
Most effective thing you do in terms of teaching your own 3 kids?
I try, and I don't do this always, have dinner with the whole family, like proper dinner, and we have a kind of discussion topic when possible.
And your hero? Who's your hero, defined any way you want to?
I've always been a fan. Historically, I would say Benjamin Franklin, Mark Twain, because I've always appreciated that, there were these people that did so many different things. I mean, Benjamin Franklin started the postal system, newspapers, founder of the country, but also didn't take themselves that seriously and had this incredible sense of humor and wit that I think, transcends time.
Love that. Sal, I hope you will come back and join me on the show again. I so appreciate having you.
This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with my fellow Mountain View resident, Sal Khan. Now, he's built a really special thing in the online education world, and he's super relevant right now, given that so many kids are learning in a remote way. But you know what I appreciated about him? I appreciated the conversation and the ideas around what democracy could look like, maybe a virtual democracy of sort. Really big ideas there. I also love some of his thoughts around nonprofits and governments. Maybe nonprofits really could be the R&D engine that lots of our governments need in order to really kind of think and move creatively. Appreciated all that. Hey, if you're enjoying this, think about subscribing. Definitely tell a friend. And best of all, enjoy that podcast. Let me know what you think about it. I'll see you soon. Hey, tune into the Carlos Watson Show. It's like no other. You're going to enjoy it every weekday on YouTube.